Discuss these new headlines is UCSF infectious diseases specialist, Dr. Peter Chin Hong. Dr. Chin Hong, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Kristen. Thanks for having me on.
All right, so Pfizer's CEO says a fourth dose of their COVID vaccine is necessary. The company has submitted to the FDA data. Is it necessary, you think, based on everything we know about immunity so far?
I mean, the answer is yes and maybe yes. So it depends on what your guideposts are. I mean, if you're looking at the metric of preventing serious disease, hospitalization, and death, one would arguably say that the booster is probably good enough right now based on the data we have in the US. But if you're preventing just a breakthrough infection, even though it may be asymptomatic or mild, then you probably need a shot every 6 months because our antibodies wane after 6 months, even though our inside immune system, the memory T cells and B cells, remain intact for a very long time.
So which criteria do you think we'll go by? Preventing cases or preventing serious outcomes?
Well, it depends on whether or not we're in the middle of a surge and who you're thinking about. So take, for example, healthcare workers in the middle of a winter surge, say this winter is bad or even before then, you may want to prevent infection because right now everyone who gets infected has to stay home for at least 5 days. The UK, of course, and South Africa, for example, dispense with that, and you don't even have to isolate there if you're positive. So, you know, based on our rules to protect the workforce, that might be a rationale. And if there's eventual data that more and more older people are coming into the hospital, even after a booster, that might be a rationale to prevent serious disease by using a booster.
Okay, so wait and see. Meantime, let's talk about Pfizer's vaccine for kids under 5. The youngest kids, the only one not eligible for any vaccine right now. How is that coming along? Because it seems so close to approval despite disappointing efficacy results a month ago, but now it feels a lot less concrete.
It's working out to be kind of interesting from a business perspective because you know, Pfizer had banked on using a much lower dose in the under 5, so 3 micrograms as opposed to 30 micrograms in adults. And when they went back to add a third shot, Moderna, meanwhile, using a higher dose, is this week presenting data to the FDA. So they may end up being ahead of the curve for their, well, actually it's 6 and under for Moderna, group because they're using a higher dose with 2 shots instead of 3 in Pfizer. So it will work out to be kind of interesting. Nevertheless, I think we're going to be hopefully close by early April to either Pfizer with 3 shots or Moderna with 2 shots at a higher dose.
All right, let's see if this Moderna shot indeed is the Goldilocks dose, as they say, right? The perfect dosage. We'll see if that happens and see if they get to the finish line first. But very interesting, this weekend it made news. Former President Obama announced that he tested positive for COVID. What do you think is the takeaway from his case?
I think the takeaway from the fact that President Obama has contracted COVID is that you know, it's pretty easy to get Omicron and even easier to get BA2, which of course is marching around the world right now and supplanting Omicron. So, you know, I think, you know, be careful out there. And it's not necessarily that the pandemic is over. I think what I take away from that is that is the main point. It doesn't mean we fear it, but you do navigate the world, this post, you know, pandemic world or during pandemic world with care and humility.
Okay. And he did make the point that he is indeed vaccinated and boosted and his symptoms are fairly mild.
Scratchy throat. Yeah. 2
Okay.
days of scratchy throat. But he was in Hawaii for a bunch of time. You know, and Michelle was negative.
Okay. Look, if people haven't vaccinated yet, do you think they still need to at this point, given the percentage of us who have either vaccine or natural immunity and the fact that all these places are dropping their vaccination proof requirements?
I think vaccination is by far the best insurance policy for the future. Usually when you get infected naturally, you probably just got infected once. So it's really like getting 1 shot. And it's not really about how you get the immune system to respond. It's the amount of times the immune system gets reminded. And that's why the booster shot is so important. Again, not for the now necessarily, but for the future.
Okay. Gregory wants to know, can seniors get a 4th shot now? I live in San Mateo County?
It's not officially endorsed by the US CDC or any body at this point for the reasons we discussed. But I know some people are getting it. In the UK, it is official for those who are over 75 to get a second booster. So I think, officially I can say we can wait to see what we're doing here. Right now, it looks pretty good for 3 shots for most people, preventing hospitalization.
Okay. Today is the first school day with the state mask mandate gone, though some local districts are keeping it wholly or partially in place. Polling suggests Californians are pretty split on this. So how do you suggest parents manage this newfound freedom at school and how to approach their decision?
So I think about 5 things. One is, who is the child? Is the child immunocompromised? Does the child have a history of congenital heart disease? Those are the risk groups, or neurologic disease. Those are the risk groups for getting sicker than the general pediatric population. The second is, who does the child live with? Does the child live with someone who's immunocompromised in the household? And then the 3 V's, of course, are, is the child vaccinated? What's the level of virus in the community? And, is there ventilation or other risk mitigation in school? So I think it becomes an individual risk benefit for each parent. I know that gets hard, but to take things back, just focusing on the virus, we're almost landed the plane. We're like 40 per 100,000 per week in San Francisco, for example. And that's, the old moderate tier in the CDC. And if we wait till April, like some school districts, Sacramento, San Diego, you're going to get even lower to where we were in June 15, 2021.
Yeah. All right. Look, while we're marching toward an endemic approach, China is taking this strict COVID zero, crackdown on every case approach still. This weekend, it actually locked down a couple of big regions affecting about 50 million people. Does this make sense to you?
I think it doesn't make sense, unfortunately, because not even China can really prevent Omicron from getting in and infecting a lot of people. And the worry I think a lot of people have with China, like what we're seeing in Hong Kong right now, and Korea to a lower extent, is that the population hasn't really seen a lot of COVID before. So when they do get it, it's going to really run rampant, particularly since China hasn't used a lot of mRNA vaccines. They've used kind of like the traditional vaccines, not Sinopharm and Sinovac, which are not quite as good as the mRNA vaccines.
Right. And remember, when China makes such a move, it has global impact, right? Shenzhen is one of the regions that they lock down, and that's where they make the Apple products and, with their factories. So this is definitely something that's impactful. All right. Vivian has a question for you. What is considered fully vaccinated now? 2 doses or 2 doses plus the booster? And J&J, 1 dose plus the booster. What's the definition?
I think I can make it simple. I think from a medical perspective, I would love it if somebody gets exposed at least 3 times to a vaccine or natural immunity. So if you got exposed naturally, then you get 2. So just add up to 3. Officially, it's probably still going to count as 2, but from a medical perspective or healthcare perspective, I think 3 is the magic number. If you look at hepatitis B, human papillomavirus, measles, mumps, and rubella, they're all given in 3s.
That makes so much sense. I love that. All right, 3 is the magic number. Dr. Peter Chin-Hong, thank you so very much. Always great talking with you. See you later.
Same here, Kristen. Thank you.
Take care. All right, coming up next, Mayor London Breed announces a new plan to welcome workers back into the city. We are breaking down the Bloom SF initiative with ABC 7 News insider Phil Mateer. Be right back. All right, everybody, thank you for your great questions for Dr. Chin-Hong. 3 is the magic number. And if you had COVID, that counts as one of the numbers. All right. Thank you so much. Take a short break and be right back. San Francisco Mayor London Breed wants downtown to be a fun place for workers who are returning to the city after 2 years of working from home. That's what the mayor said today as she announced a new initiative called Bloom SF. It's a week-long series of events aimed at bringing life back to the city.
But no one likes to have a good time more than San Franciscans. No one takes fun more seriously than San Franciscans. And so part of the fun means that when we come back, we get to see some amazing activities.
Bloom SF is a partnership between the city, local businesses, and transportation leaders. So joining us now to talk about it is ABC 7 News insider Phil Matier. Phil, good to see you.
It's going to be an interesting time as we see Mayor Breed transform herself from sort of the health commander-in-chief to the chief salesman of the city. Because right now, the big job is selling San Francisco, and that's what she's kicking off this week.
She's doing that, and give us the context under which she is doing this, right? What is the state of the city right now with regard to office workers 2 years since the pandemic began?
Well, it's not that good. We have to be honest about it. San Francisco is very innovative, and unlike a lot of other cities, we heavily relied on tech and tech workers, people that could basically work off a laptop. Well, they've discovered that they can do that now. So the best case scenario is even if we get the office workers back, they're probably going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and then we're going to see some sort of blend on Monday and Fridays. The mayor is trying to make San Francisco look inviting for those days to get people to come back on their own, to make them want to. Also, we have to take a look at the tourism numbers. If you take a look, I was talking to the SF airport people, and domestic flights are at about 70% of what they were pre-COVID, but international flights are only at about 40%, which means our tourism and business market is really still depressed. Hotels are less than half full, and that's why the mayor is taking off now for a 10-day jaunt sales trip through Europe to try to sell San Francisco to the Europeans. Why Europe? Because they are the most open right now post-COVID, and they have the most money. Asian markets are still sort of battening down the hatches and aren't as freely moving. So they're going to try to get the next wave of tourists from Europe, but it's going to be tough, Christian, I got to tell you, because Las Vegas, Orlando, New York, other cities, they came out earlier. They unmasked earlier. They were much more welcoming, and they've got a head start on San Francisco.
All right, whether it's office workers or tourists, let's talk about why it's so critical that they come back in large numbers. It seems obvious, but really there are so many industries and infrastructures that depend on them, right?
Well, if you just turned around wherever you are in the Bay Area, you see sort of some impact on it. It may not necessarily be on your street, but the person on your street was doing business with somebody in San Francisco, whether it's caterers, whether it's film people, whether it's office supplies, you name it across the board. And, you know, San Francisco is the hub. Tourism, for example, Napa, Sonoma, all of that tourism industry is dependent on people stopping in on San Francisco first. The peninsula, the business and the biotech, a lot of that also is interfaced with San Francisco. Transit, BART, ridership continues to be down. Caltrain, ridership continues to be down. Golden Gate Bridge. The bad thing is, if it's down, then they're going to come to us to try to make up for the money that they're losing by those empty trains you're seeing out there. So the faster San Francisco can get back, the faster everybody else can get back to sort of a normal state. That could take time, though, because things are getting slower. The good news is you might be able to get a seat on BART. The bad news is I'm not going to guarantee you what the price is going to be in 6 months if we don't get people back in big numbers.
Yeah. All right. Without going into too much detail, what are the main carrots that they're dangling in front of you as part of Bloom SF to get people to come back on those days? And I want to ask you, are they enough? Do they hit the mark? I mean, it's like, will acrobats and flowers and entertainment actually be enough to convince you, the office worker tired of the commute, especially now with the high gas prices, to come back to your cubicle?
No. But does it hurt? No. Is it something the mayor can do? Yes. Is it something that the downtown chamber and her constituents want her to do? Yes. So, Kristen, yes, politics is sometimes public relations. Is an acrobat or in Union Square going to bring office workers back? No, but it could bring attention to the fact both around here and around the country that San Francisco is open again. We made, history by having such low COVID fatalities, by being in such a lockdown mode. Now it's come back in some ways to haunt us, where, the virtue of that is now that most people think that we're shut down. So no, an acrobat or a comic or something like that is not going to bring the office workers back. She's also working with businesses to try to get them to bring it back. But we have to come to the realization it's a new post-COVID day and things aren't going to be the same.
I don't want to get too much into crime because that is a factor here as well in terms of whether it's a deterrence for people to come back. We'll talk more about that on ABC 7 News at 4 today. But I want to ask you, the mayor stood with business leaders today just a couple weeks before she announced her welcome back to SF pledge, where executives from some of the biggest companies, Uber, Visa, Wells Fargo, Gap, Google, they were all there. They are aligned here, aren't they? Because sometimes the mayor has to fight the business interest too, but it seems like they are aligned in bringing people back.
They are. But Christian, the big question is, what is their definition of bringing back versus the mayor? The mayor would like everybody back here 5 days a week. I'm not sure everybody wants to be back in 5 days a week because the traffic was a nightmare, but they're going to give 3 and then possibly 2. It's going to be a blend. But yes, the business leaders, the Ubers, the Lyfts, the Salesforces, they want to have people back. They're bringing people back. But the city that they come back to can't be the same one it was before. As you mentioned, the crime, the mental ill, the homelessness on the streets. If people don't like what they see, an acrobat in Union Square isn't going to change that perception. So that's another critical venture. They've got to make the streets welcoming. And the first part of welcoming is safe. And that's also with BART as well. You can talk about high gas prices is going to put people back on those trains. They still want to feel safe. So the post-COVID world, it's got to be safe just as it was before.
Yeah.
Or actually better than before because it was in trouble before.
You are right about that. We have about 30 seconds, but I want to ask you, how is convention business right now? Is that coming back at all?
It's still slow. It's still slow. And it's not just because of the COVID shutdown. What we're seeing, what we had was a situation where San Francisco just became so expensive. So what happened was Las Vegas and Orlando and these other convention sites, San Diego, Los Angeles, that are cheaper, they took advantage of being open and getting business back. So they got conventions. They filled up. Arizona filled up. We lagged behind, and now it's proving to be expensive. So we got to figure out some way there. There's some backroom deals going on right now to try to lower the cost of conventions. But we like to pay well. We like to have benefits for our workers, and that costs money.
It does. All right, ABC 7 News insider Phil Mateer with his take on Bloom SF. Thanks so much, Phil. We'll see you again at 4.
Keep an eye on that acrobat.
All right. Coming up next, sleep disrupted. We just sprung forward into daylight saving time, and we're talking with a sleep expert about how to cope and why many doctors want this yearly ritual to end. We'll be right back.
In commercial break.
All right, we'll take a short break and be right back. This past weekend, most Americans set their clocks forward by 1 hour and got 1 less hour of sleep. We do this every year, fall back in the fall, spring forward in the spring. But more and more doctors are now saying we should put an end to this policy because it's outdated and wreaks havoc on our bodies. But for now, we have to live with it. So joining us live with tips on how to cope with the time change is Dr. Yuen. She's a sleep medicine specialist at UCSF and a spokesperson for the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. Dr. Yuen, thanks for your time today.
My pleasure to be here with you.
All right, so before we get into the policy question, explain the science behind why many of us, myself included, are extra tired today.
Yeah, so just to move that 1 hour earlier is so hard, right? Because our internal biological clocks don't want to listen necessarily just because it's a clock change. The other has to do with how much sunlight we actually get during the day. Just because we go to sleep or we try to go to sleep an hour earlier doesn't mean that we can go necessarily fall asleep an hour earlier. So that's the most difficult question. And that's why we want to gradually shift our time to go to bed 20 minutes at a time and maybe get up 20 minutes earlier. If we have a few days, that would be great. If not, at least get up next morning, like Tuesday morning, get lots of sunlight, go for a walk and train the biological clock so that our eating habits and our sleeping habits could be more normalized.
Sounds like you're saying we should have started a week ago, like adjusting like 10, 15 minutes each day. Okay.
Ideally, yeah, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, for sure, because the internal clock can be nudged a little bit at a time, 20 minutes earlier, but to make that 1 hour leap is almost impossible to do on a spurt.
Okay, yeah, I am not disciplined enough and I just did it. And actually, I felt like I slept in a little bit, but I'm still tired. I wonder if our bodies naturally have an easier time falling back in November. Which one is harder?
Yeah, for most people, they can stay up a little bit longer because the internal clock, where the brain decides what time we should get up, tend to be a little bit longer than the 24-hour days. So most often we're off by about 5 to 15 minutes. So it's always easier to stay up longer than it is to force ourselves to go to sleep earlier.
All right. Hey, which countries and continents do this, the switching of time, and why did it all begin?
Right, so the time change in theory originated to save energy during World War I. So Germany started that concept, and then we quickly adapted the same principle. And what was found was that we really didn't save all that much energy, so it became unpopular, and we reverted back to standard time. And there were another OPEC embargo, similar to our current situation, I guess, where there was lack of energy to be distributed. So we tried that again. Again, it became unpopular. So now we do it basically March through November. And the issue is when we had daylight savings starting in April in the past, before 2007, it's more aligned with the axis of the Earth in that we have the time, the number of hours of sunlight available are more consistent with that schedule. Mm-hmm. So since we moved to March and November, it's less consistent because we cannot make the sun rise any earlier than it does. And so we actually have more hours darker in the morning. We may get a little bit of sunlight in the afternoon, which some people prefer. But in general, we just don't like getting up so much earlier than we should.
But overall, though, when you balance things out, is it better, from a health perspective, to do this in March? Because I would think that now me being able to run after work because there's still daylight, after I get off work, or the kids being able to finish their soccer or baseball practice, I mean, all in all, that is positive, isn't it, compared to, say, one day or perhaps a week of being a little more fatigued?
Sure, there are definitely health consequences and advantages and disadvantages, right? So because we cannot make ourselves go to sleep earlier, that it actually increases the number of accidents that one can encounter, like in fatal car accidents. That's definitely increasing during springtime when we lose an hour's sleep. And the number of medical errors also go up. I can tell you personally, I still write my notes by hand. I'm making more errors.
Yuen.
I know.
Okay, I'm going to have to put you on hold for just a second. We'll take a short break, continue this conversation on Facebook Live.
In commercial
No, nobody wants any doctors, especially being tired and making mistakes like that, writing a prescription or something else. So if the problem is the switching back and forth, is it better from a medical standpoint, health standpoint, to stay on standard time or daylight saving time, Pacific daylight time, if you will?
Right. So American Academy of Sleep Medicine will recommend staying on standard time. It is the switching back and forth, which is wreaking havoc on our internal clock system. We also know that particularly the population more at risk are the teens, the middle school and high schoolers, because their clocks are actually much longer than the biological day. So for them to try to go to sleep earlier is almost an impossibility. And furthermore, we know that they have more exposure to media, which emits that blue spectrum light we've been trying to avoid in the evening times. And so for them, having more sunlight and suppressing the internal melatonin secretion will make them go to sleep even later. So one of the concerns is that they are suffering from a lack of sleep. We know that with the pandemic, there is more distress. Depressive symptoms have increased, anxiety have increased. Yeah. So we want that population to get more sleep.
Yeah. It's not entirely up to us, of course. It takes an act of Congress to make it so that we can change things. But Dr. Yuen, thank you so much for offering your insights. And noted, next year or even just in the fall, I'm going to start switching a whole week before, 10 minutes at a time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Are you tired? Who's tired? Share with me if you're tired and having a hard time with this daylight saving. Laura Lynn, you say more light in the evening is better. See, I'm with you. I think so too. I would stay on daylight time. Yeah, Samson, you too? I know, I think so too.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Thank you so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers Today. We'll be here every weekday at 3 on air and on live stream answering your questions. World News Tonight is coming up next, and we'll be back here for you at 4 o'clock.